What if you were accused of something terrible, just because of a misunderstanding? Imagine you're just walking through an airport, minding your business, ready to get home. You're tired, you're carrying your bags, you just want to get through security and sit down. And then, out of nowhere, a police dog starts barking at you. Loud, aggressive, non-stop. People stop. They stare. The officers start moving in. You can already feel it, the judgment, the suspicion. Your heart starts racing, but before you can even open your mouth, they've already made up their minds. That's exactly what happened to Olivia, a pregnant woman caught in a terrifying situation where no one believed her. And by the time the truth finally came out, it was almost too late. But here's the craziest part. The dog wasn't wrong. Before we dive in, let us know. Where are you watching from, and what time is it? Drop it in the comments. Let's get into this crazy story. Olivia Carter was finally heading home after a long and tiring work trip. At 7 months pregnant, traveling wasn't easy, but she had no choice. Her job required it. She was a successful businesswoman, yet no matter how much she achieved, she couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place in certain spaces. People made assumptions about her. The judgment was always there, sometimes subtle, sometimes not. She had dealt with racial profiling before, especially at airports. Security checks that took longer than necessary, extra questioning, that look officers gave when they saw her. It was exhausting. She just wanted to get through the airport without any trouble, and finally put her feet up at home. Dragging her carry-on behind her, Olivia stopped at a small airport shop to grab a bottle of water and some snacks. As she browsed the shelves, she felt a strange sensation, like someone was watching her. She glanced up and spotted a man standing near the entrance. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket, and his gaze was fixed on her. Her stomach tightened, but she told herself not to overthink it. Maybe he was just looking around. Maybe she was imagining things. She grabbed her items, paid at the counter, and walked out, refusing to let paranoia get the best of her. Still, as she made her way toward her gate, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. The back of her neck tingled, her instincts telling her something wasn't right. But she brushed it off. She was just tired, anxious to get home. Besides, what was the worst that could happen? She had no idea that in just a few minutes her world was about to turn upside down. Olivia walked toward the security checkpoint, her shopping bags in one hand, her carry-on in the other. She was exhausted, but the thought of getting home kept her going. Just a few more minutes, and she'd be through security, one step closer to resting her swollen feet. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder and sighed. Airports always made her uneasy, but today she tried to ignore the feeling. Then, out of nowhere, a loud, vicious bark shattered the air. She froze. A police dog was lunging straight at her. The German shepherd strained against its leash, barking like it had found a dangerous criminal. People gasped, stepping back. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. Why was the dog acting like that? The officer holding the leash struggled to control it, yanking back hard. But the dog wouldn't stop. It barked, growled, eyes locked on Olivia as if it had found something dangerous. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't happening. She glanced around. Passengers were staring. Some whispered. Others shook their heads. They thought she did something. She could feel it in their looks, the way some clutched their bags tighter, like she was a threat. The officer's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, stay where you are." Her pulse pounded. What's going on?" No one answered. The barking was too loud, too aggressive. Her skin prickled as the whispers around her grew. She knew what people were assuming. A TSA agent stepped forward. "Ma'am, we need to check your bags." Her hands tightened around the handles. "Check her bags? Why?" Passengers murmured louder. Olivia's throat went dry. Not again. She had been through extra screenings before, had watched others glide through security while she was stopped for random checks. But this was different. This felt worse. The dog wouldn't stop. She forced herself to keep her voice steady. "Of course." But when she reached out to hand over the bags, her hands were shaking. The TSA agent grabbed them and placed them on the metal table. Another officer joined in, both wearing stiff expressions. Olivia's heart pounded harder. What could they possibly find? She took a deep breath. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong, but somehow this already felt like a nightmare she wouldn't wake up from. The TSA officer reached into Olivia's shopping bag, his face unreadable. He pulled out a tightly wrapped package. The second it was visible, gasps filled the air. People stepped back. A mother grabbed her child's hand, pulling them away. A man shook his head, whispering something under his breath. The weight of their judgment hit Olivia like a wave. Her mind raced. What was that? Where did it come from? The officer held the package up like it was evidence in a crime scene. He exchanged a look with his partner. "We need backup." Another officer immediately stepped forward, his tone cold and firm. "Ma'am, you're being detained for questioning." Detained? Olivia's heart pounded. Her stomach twisted in knots. This wasn't happening. I don't understand," she stammered. "I don't know what that is. It's not mine." But no one was listening. The officers were already surrounding her. One of them muttered something into his radio. "Possible contraband found. Securing the suspect now." Suspect. That word made Olivia feel sick. She looked around for someone, anyone, to defend her, to speak up. But all she saw were stares. Some passengers looked curious, others downright disgusted. The whispers grew louder. "Wow, she almost got away with it." I knew something was off about her. Her hands trembled. "Please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "You have to believe me. I don't know how that got in my bag." The officer holding her bags didn't even blink. "Tell it to the investigators." Tears burned at the back of her eyes. This couldn't be happening. Then, out of nowhere, a voice shouted across the terminal, "Hey, stop him!" Olivia's head snapped up. It was him, the man from the airport shop. The same one who had been staring at her earlier. And now, he was running. For a second, no one moved. Then, the police dog, the same one that had been barking at her, suddenly whipped around and lunged forward, chasing after the real threat. Everything happened in an instant. The airport exploded into chaos. Security officers yelled, passengers gasped, and the man sprinted toward an exit. But he wasn't fast enough. The dog caught up to him first, snarling, snapping at his heels. The man stumbled, arms flailing. That split second was all security needed. A guard tackled him to the ground. Olivia watched, frozen in shock. The officers wrestled the man's arms behind his back, pinning him down. He thrashed, yelling, but it was no use. One of the officers reached into his jacket and pulled out something identical to what they had found in Olivia's bag. The pieces clicked together all at once. He planted it on her. He must have slipped it into her bag when she wasn't looking, hoping she'd get blamed. Passengers started whispering again. But this time, their words were different. They weren't accusing her anymore. One man murmured, "She was innocent." Another woman gasped, "Oh my God, she almost went to jail for that." Olivia felt like she couldn't breathe. A few minutes ago, she was a suspect. Now, everyone realized the truth. One of the officers turned back to her, eyes wide, like he finally saw her differently. "Ma'am, I think we owe you an apology, But Olivia didn't answer. She was still processing the fact that her life had almost been destroyed. The moment the officers pulled the identical package from the man's jacket, everything changed. The passengers, who had been whispering about Olivia just moments ago, now looked around in shock. The security officers exchanged uneasy glances, realizing they had made a terrible mistake. Olivia was not the suspect. She was the victim. One of the officers hesitated before stepping toward her. His voice was quieter now, his tone different. "Ma'am, it appears you were framed." Framed. The word made Olivia's stomach turn. She had almost been arrested, publicly humiliated, and possibly sent to jail for something she didn't do, all because they assumed the worst about her. Her heart pounded, but not from fear anymore, from anger. She looked at the officers, her hands trembling, not with nerves, but with the frustration of a lifetime of being judged too quickly. "You assumed I was guilty the second that dog barked," she said, her voice sharp but steady. "You didn't ask me a single question. You didn't consider that maybe I was the wrong person. You just saw me and made up your mind." The officer shifted uncomfortably. "I understand, ma'am, and I sincerely apologize. We were just following protocol." Olivia let out a short, bitter laugh. "Protocol?" She shook her head. "Was it protocol to let an entire airport watch while you accused me of something I didn't do? To ignore me when I said I was innocent? If that man hadn't run, would you have even tried to believe me?" The officer opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had no answer, because they both knew the truth. Meanwhile, the real criminal was being dragged away in handcuffs. He thrashed, yelling that it wasn't his fault, that this wasn't fair, as if fairness had anything to do with it. Passengers, who had stepped away from Olivia earlier, now looked at her differently, some with guilt, others with sympathy, but it was too late. Olivia exhaled slowly. She wasn't going to let this break her. She wouldn't let them see her as a victim. She lifted her chin, looked the officer in the eye, and said, "Next time, maybe listen before judging." And with that, she picked up her bags and walked away, leaving them with nothing but their guilt. A week later, Olivia sat in her living room, scrolling through the news on her phone. She had been trying to put the airport incident behind her, but it was everywhere. The story had spread far beyond what she expected. Headlines talked about how a pregnant black woman had been falsely accused, humiliated in public, and nearly arrested for a crime she didn't commit. People were outraged. Social media was filled with comments about racial profiling and how quickly security had assumed she was guilty. Some people defended the officers, saying they were just doing their jobs. But most people saw the truth. This wasn't about doing their jobs. This was about who they chose to believe. The backlash forced the airport to respond. Officials released a public statement saying they were reviewing their security procedures. They promised new training on unconscious bias and investigative protocols. Olivia wasn't sure if it would change anything, but at least they were being forced to acknowledge the problem. Then, one evening, she got a call she never expected. It was the officer from the airport, the same one who had looked at her like she was a criminal. His voice sounded different now, less cold, more hesitant. "Miss Carter," he began, "I wanted to apologize. I got caught up in the moment and I didn't stop to think. I judged you before I had the facts. I see that now." Olivia sat in silence for a moment. She had waited days to hear those words. But now that they had come, they didn't feel as satisfying as she thought they would. She took a deep breath. "I appreciate you saying that," she finally replied. "But an apology doesn't erase what happened. You need to do better next time. For the next person." The officer sighed. I will. After hanging up, Olivia knew she had to share her story. She had stayed quiet about things like this in the past, but not this time. She typed out everything: how no one listened to her, how quickly they assumed she was guilty, how it took a man running away for them to even consider the truth. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She wanted people to understand that this wasn't just her story. It was the story of so many others who never got justice. By morning, her post had gone viral. Thousands of people commented, sharing their own experiences with racial profiling. The conversation was growing. People were finally listening. That night, Olivia sat on her couch, one hand resting on her belly. She knew the world wasn't fair. She knew it wouldn't change overnight. But as she whispered to her unborn child, her voice was steady. "The world's not perfect, but I'll make sure you grow up strong." Olivia sat in silence, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. She had nearly lost her freedom because of an assumption. If that man hadn't run, she would have been arrested, humiliated, and possibly sent to jail for something she had no part in. And the worst part? This wasn't just about her. She thought about all the people who didn't get the chance to prove their innocence. The ones who were accused, judged, and punished before they ever had a chance to speak. The ones who didn't have a camera catching the real criminal. The ones who were never believed, no matter how much they pleaded. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern. As she looked at the messages flooding her phone, she saw stories just like hers. People from all over the world were sharing their experiences. How they had been followed in stores, stopped by security for no reason, accused of things they never did. She knew this conversation needed to happen. People needed to understand that this wasn't paranoia. This was reality. But she also knew something else. She wasn't going to let this moment break her. She had faced humiliation, but she had also stood her ground. She had been ignored, but in the end, the truth had come out. She had been falsely accused, but she refused to let their mistake define her. She placed a hand on her belly and whispered again, "The world's not perfect, but I'll make sure you grow up strong." Now, it's your turn. Have you ever been wrongly accused of something? How did it feel? Let's talk in the comments. And here's a question for you. Do you think racial bias plays a role in how security treats people? Why or why not? Let's have this conversation.